started on the digestive tract. That is that there is a senior seminar tomorrow. Evan and Jared and Sam Russo, is that his last name? Will be giving their senior seminar about language and genetics and language defects related to, and the gene that they're going to be talking about is called FOXP2. And this is an interesting gene because geneticists have a habit of calling it the language gene, which makes neurobiologists like me crazy because it is not a gene for language. Well, I'll let them tell you about what it actually is. They are going to open up the black box of this controversy related to the FOXP2 gene and language, both in humans and in animals. Right?
Yeah.
Not language in animals. Well, vocalizations in animals. Communication. So, tomorrow, Thursday, 4 p.m., CST 300. There's also a Zoom link, but you have to contact Chris, I think, to find out the Zoom link.
It should be on today, though.
Today, Errol might have the Zoom link. But it's also in person in CST 300. All right. So you have your renal exam. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm not going to go through it here, but I'm happy to have either if you and a group of students want to get together and talk about it, or if you individually would like to discuss it, just set up a meeting with me. All right. New topic, final topic of the term in this course, the digestive tract, how we extract nutrients from food. Today, well, we're going to start, so I have 3 sections today, so you're going to pick up 3 PowerPoints. I'm not sure I'll get through all of the third, but we're going to see how far we get. First one is to give an overview, start to learn some of the anatomical terms, start to talk about the digestion of 3 major food groups: carbohydrate, protein, and fat, in a broad strokes, sort of a prelim or sort of an overview way of, and then as we get into the details, fill in some gaps. Talk about the layered structure of the digestive tract, exocrine secretions, and endocrine secretions. And we'll start to talk about saliva and swallowing today. There's the fancy word for swallow. So in the past, when I taught this class, we've started with a sort of a game. This is a drug, an ad for a drug, a cholesterol lowering drug. And this was the image of the digestive tract that this drug company put up in a non-medical, a magazine. And it is so wrong. And we played a game trying to figure out how many ways we could count it was wrong. But in the interest of time, just things like, well, it doesn't start here. This digestive tract does not start here. We're missing the stomach. We're missing the pancreas. It certainly doesn't end here. So there's small and large intestine. So this is like so poor. I mean, you can see why an artist would just want to simplify things, and yet. And then there was another one for, this was for an ad for a probiotic pill, a pill that helps the microbiome. And this is better, right? At least we have a mouth, and we have a stomach, and we still have a liver. It's like the liver is free-floating and separated. No, there's no pancreas, but at least there's a small and a large intestine. So this one is better. And here is the slide from your textbook, and the one that I printed out for you. And these are the anatomical terms that you should know. So we will be talking about the mouth and the salivary glands today. We will talk about the esophagus and the stomach later today. We will start to talk about the liver and the pancreas later today, I hope. And then we will go to intestines on Monday. what is going to be on the quiz, now remember there is a quiz this week, there will be made available to you on Friday, not before, and it's due on Sunday. I think they've changed the way the locks work, but I think you can still get in with your ID until 9. I think you can, yeah, but you can pick up the quiz until 9, because that's when the CST desk closes on Sunday. Isn't that right? I think you can pick, if you get into a, I'll be monitoring my email at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. If you get into a situation where I can't get the quiz, I'm ready to take it, I'll come in and fix it. So send me an email. But typically, you would do it before 9, you'd start it before 9 p.m. on Sunday when the CST desk closes, and then, so you would take it right then and there, and so the fact that the building closes at 11 shouldn't be an impact. This will be a short quiz. If you know what you're doing, it should take you 15 or 20 minutes. Yes, question? Okay. So, how far we get today will determine some of the questions that I put on the quiz. I will make a very solid effort to not put anything on the quiz that wasn't covered in class today, even if it was in the colored book. These are the words that you should learn. I'm not going to go through them, because we'll go through them as we learn physiology. Let's talk about the digestion of food overview. So I could do this 2 ways. I could walk through the digestive tract from the mouth to the anus, or to the large intestine, and we could do it anatomically and physiologically, or I could talk about, take each food group apart, piece by piece. Talk about carbohydrate, and then walk through the system. And then talk about protein, and walk through the system. Talk about fat, and walk through the system. What I'm going to do instead is sort of go back and forth. Okay? So we're going to give an overview. So this was an overview of where we're going from the mouth to the large intestine, anatomically. This is an overview of where we're going from the food group perspective. So let's talk overview of carbohydrate digestion. It starts in the mouth with the saliva producing an enzyme called amylase, which starts to cut or hydrolyze carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are chains of sugars, polysaccharides. So we eat starch, and we eat complex sugars as carbohydrate, and it starts in the mouth. Later on, we're going to see that the pancreas also produces amylase. Same enzyme, different isoform, same enzyme, cutting carbohydrate into disaccharides, 2 sugars connected together in a covalent bond, and then we're going to work on those later on. Like right now. Then in the small intestine, lactase, another enzyme, and other enzymes cut the disaccharides into monosaccharides, simple sugars. Glucose, galactose, fructose are the main monosaccharides that we eat. And then, so we've digested them by enzymatic breakdown, and then we are going to use sodium co-transporters to get them from the lumen of the intestine into the blood. Well, across the apical membrane, and then passive transport to get it across the basolateral membrane. So this is a theme you've seen before. Sodium glucose co-transporters in the kidney were important. Sodium glucose co-transporters in the intestine are going to be important for absorption of glucose and other carbohydrates. That's the carbohydrate story in broad strokes. So,
what did you say about the basolateral diffusion?
So in the apical membrane, it's sodium coupled cotransport, and then the basolateral membrane, it's uniport.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's the broad overview. Mouth, stomach, small intestine. Proteins are really the digestion of proteins starts in the stomach. We're going to have an enzyme in the stomach called pepsin that is going to start to digest proteins. Remember, proteins are polymers of amino acids. So we're going to start breaking down proteins by hydrolyzing peptide bonds in the stomach. And then there are going to be some pancreatic enzymes whose name you should know. Not for the quiz. Well, maybe, we'll see. Enzymes whose names you should know that further break down proteins into amino acids and short peptides. And again, we're going to have sodium-coupled amino acid transport in the apical membrane and passive transport in the basolateral membrane. That's protein. Question?
What was the coupled receptor or coupled co-transporter again?
It's a sodium amino acid co-transport. So stomach, small intestine, that's it for protein digestion. For fat, it's most complicated. So you know that fats are not really water soluble. So we've got to figure out they form globs. If you've taken a stick of butter and you tried to massage it into a water, anything that was aqueous, it just forms globs of butter, right? It doesn't dissolve. Well, we eat fat, but we need to dissolve it in order to digest it. So the first step, the first step is in the mouth because there is a lipase in saliva that helps to start hydrolyzed fat, but it doesn't do a very good job of it. Bile from the liver and the gallbladder acts to make an emulsion of fat in the aqueous solution of our saliva and our digestive juice. So bile is like a detergent. If you take a greasy pan, a pan like a baking pan that had been greased with butter, and you try to clean it with just water, all you're doing is smearing the butter around. But if you take that pan and you add some detergent to the water, now you can clean the pan because it is solubilizing, or it's first emulsifying and then solubilizing the fat, and then it can be washed away. So bile is acting like a detergent. What is an emulsion? And you know what happens if you take oil and water and mix them together in a bottle, right? I could have done this demo. Take oil and water, mix them together in a bottle, and they separate, right? Just like oil and vinegar in a salad dressing. If you take oil, water, vinegar, and egg yolk, which is not a detergent, but it is an emulsifier, oil, water, and egg yolk, and you shake it together, you make mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is an emulsion of vinegar, fat, and egg yolk. I've never made mayonnaise, but I'm told you can do this. So that jar of mayonnaise that you buy is an emulsion of fat, vinegar, which is aqueous, and egg yolk, and then some other stuff, flavorings and stuff. So an emulsion, first, the bile detergents form this emulsion, then lipase is going to work its way on this emulsion to hydrolyze the fat in the emulsion. We're going to use passive diffusion an enzymatic process to make a complicated intracellular particle called a chylomicron. I'm just going to introduce this now. We're going to come back to this, I promise. We'll come back to this. Chylomicrons are then going to get exocytosed, and the lymph is going to pick up those chylomicrons that are exocytosed from the intestine, and then we're going to get into the blood from the lymph. Carbohydrate and protein are transported directly from the intestinal epithelium into veins. But fat is first delivered to the lymph, which then goes to the veins. So fat is most complicated. This will not be on the quiz. Questions about this overview of the food groups? We're going to unpack each of these steps in detail. All right. Here is an image from your textbook. It's too small to see, too small to read, but it's the pathway from mouth to stomach to small intestine to large intestine and then excretion. So the main path is mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestines. That's the main path. The pancreas and the liver are accessory organs. They are essential, but they are accessory organs. The food does not go through the pancreas or the liver. The food goes stomach, intestine, but the secretions of the pancreas and the liver are essential for the digestion of food in the intestine. So in order to see what's going on here, I broke that slide up into two halves. I think your handout is still kind of too small to see, but this is slide 8 on your handout. So let's go through this. So let's go through the overview. Again, remember what I'm doing is going back and forth between food and anatomy physiology. So now we're talking anatomy and physiology, sort of going through overview of the system. The reason I'm doing this is that I feel like in the past this has worked because it gives you a sense of where we're going, and then we get into the nitty-gritty details with knowing what the roadmap or the general perspective is. If I just did the nitty-gritties, it's less satisfying than knowing where we're going. So in the mouth, saliva, chewing, mastication is the fancy word for chewing, is going to mix saliva with food, mucus from the saliva with food to lubricate and sort of make it into a bolus of food. And there is amylase in the saliva that is going to start the digestion of carbohydrate. And there is lipase. It's not on this slide, but there is lipase in saliva that also starts the digestion of fat. Not very well. Then we swallow. We're going to talk about swallowing in a minute. Food is moved through the esophagus by peristaltic. That's a word that I want you to know. Peristalsis. Peristalsis is the process. Peristaltic movement is the process. Peristalsis is a wave of movement. Like, if you have a tube of toothpaste and you're trying to use all of the toothpaste, you squeeze the toothpaste at the bottom of the tube and then you work your way towards the nozzle of the tube, right? That's peristalsis, a wave of movement that is efficient for moving the toothpaste from the tube into out of the other end. If you have a tube of toothpaste that is half empty and you squeeze it in the middle, you get very little out because half of it goes the wrong way. But if you have a tube of toothpaste that is half empty and you squeeze your way up, you get it all out by peristaltic movement. Your esophagus does that. So you can move food from your mouth to your stomach even in a zero gravity environment, or even against gravity. If I turned you upside down and I said swallow, it wouldn't be easy, but you could swallow food from your mouth into your stomach upside down because of the peristalsis. There's also mucus that's secreted for lubrication of the food as it gets into the stomach. In the stomach, we have acid, gastric acid. Gastric acid is hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid or gastric acid combined with pepsin is going to start the digestion of protein in the stomach. And we're going to have a lot of mucus secretion here because this acid would be very hazardous to the cells that line the stomach, but the mucus is there to protect the cells of the stomach from the acid. And the pancreas, the job of the pancreas, remember the pancreas is to secrete stuff into the intestines. The pancreas is going to secrete enzymes, amylase, lipase, and proteases for the digestion of carbohydrate, fat, and protein. All three food groups require enzymes secreted from the pancreas into the small intestine. So after the food moves from the stomach into the small intestine, the pancreas, the enzymes from the exocrine pancreas are essential for digesting of the food. Now you may remember or may have heard that the pancreas is also where insulin comes from, and glucagon. Those are the endocrine functions of the pancreas, and we're not really going to talk about those until next week. The pancreas also secretes bicarbonate to neutralize the acid that's coming into it from the stomach. So the stomach makes acid for the digestion of protein, but the enzymes in the intestine work best at a neutral pH, not at an acid pH. So the pancreas secretes bicarbonate to neutralize the gastric acid that is moving from the stomach into the intestines so that the enzymes can work efficiently. And because the cells of the intestine are not specialized for living in a high acid environment for very long. So pancreas, enzymes, and bicarbonate secretion. The liver, which is the other tube here, this is the tube from the liver into the small intestine. It's called the bile duct. The liver is going to make bile, which remember is the detergent necessary for emulsifying and solubilizing fat. It's going to make some more bicarbonate to help with that neutralization of gastric acid. And it is part of the excretory system. So some things in our body are cleared by the liver, not by the kidney. We're not going to talk about that too much. But bile, in addition to being required for fat digestion, is required for certain clearance or elimination. The gallbladder is going to be a place where we store and concentrate bile between meals. The small intestine is where these enzymes are going to work. So pancreatic enzymes neutralized by bicarbonate are going to work in the small intestine to break down the polysaccharides into monosaccharides, to break down the oligopeptides into amino acids, to break down the fat particles into monomers that can be absorbed. That's all going to happen in the small intestine, and then we're going to be talking about absorption of sugars, monosaccharides, absorption of amino acids, the unit of protein, and absorption of fats and fatty acids, the makeup of our fat foods. We'll get through through the small intestine with all the digestion going on. It's going into the blood one way or another, directly into venous blood or into lymph and then venous blood, depending on the food. And then we're going to get into the large intestine, which is really the most important thing is recovery of water that was used to digest all this food on its way out. Production of a more concentrated waste product. And you know the waste product I'm talking about.
Shit.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. God speaks. Sorry. Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to start our trip into the nitty-gritty of all of these steps. That was the broad overview. Now we have to get into cellular and molecular mechanisms, anatomical detail, physiologic detail. You know where I live, right? So that's where we're going. The first thing I want to talk about is this layered structure of the intestines, of the digestive tract. So we're going to talk about a layered structure of the stomach, in the small intestine. So really what I'm talking about now is the main pathway, the stomach and the small intestines. I'm not talking about the structure of the auxiliary pathway. The structure of the main pathway, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, goes like this. It is layered with epithelial cells. Cuboidal cells, not very dissimilar, quite similar to the epithelial cells of the renal tubule. But now we're not talking about a renal tubule, we're talking about the intestinal tube. Lined with an epithelium. In the epithelial cells, or among the epithelial cells, are endocrine cells and exocrine cells. What's the difference between endocrine and exocrine? Anybody want to volunteer an answer to that question? Sophie?
Something you excrete and something you like reabsorb? Or like stays within your body?
Yeah, so an endocrine cell secretes something that goes into your bloodstream and stays within your body. An exocrine cell is something that secretes something that goes outside your body. So for example, sweat is an exocrine function. You sweat water to control your body temperature. Here in the intestines, we are going to we're going to secrete exocrine products that are used for digestion. So an endocrine cell is going to secrete something that goes into blood, and an exocrine cell is going to secrete something that goes into the lumen of the digestive tract. And the positioning of these is not accurate. We are going to be talking about the folded structure of the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. We're going to be talking about cells that secrete mucus. Just a spelling tip, I am not going to take points off, but the product is mucus, M-U-C-U-S, and the cells that produce mucus are mucus, M-U-C-O-U-S, right? I'm not going to take points off, but if you want to be accurate, you would say that mucus cells produce mucus, M-U-C-U-S. There are going to be mucus cells that secrete mucus to protect this epithelium. And we are going to see some duct cells. So ducts, not quack quack ducts, but ducts, D-U-C-T-S. Ducts are going to be important here, and they are lined with duct cells. These are not bird cells, these are duct cells, okay? And they are epithelial cells also. So we have an epithelium that's comprised of epithelial cells, endocrine cells, exocrine cells, mucus cells, and duct cells. The interstitium underneath the epithelium of the digestive tract has a name. It's not just called interstitium, it's called the lamina propria. It is interstitium, but it has a name. In lamina propria. Underneath the lamina propria, so this is the lumen and we're going towards the gut. Underneath the lamina propria is a muscle layer called the muscularis mucosa. Smooth muscle. The combination of epithelium, lamina propria, and muscularis mucosa is called the mucosa. Those three layers comprise the mucosa. Underneath the mucosa is the submucosa. Well, that's a little easy. And the submucosa is comprised of blood vessels, arteries and veins, small arteries and veins, and a layer of nerve cells. These nerve cells are going to be important for controlling the movement of these muscle layers. It turns out you have almost as many, well, you have millions, maybe hundreds of millions of nerve cells in your gut. So you've got 87 billion nerve cells in your brain, and you don't have as many in your gut, but you've got a lot of nerve cells in your gut.
You got a lot of nerves.
Yes, you do. Okay. Are you trying to throw me off my game, or is this just spontaneous? I just want to make sure I'm not being Zoom bombed. No, we're okay. The submucosa is comprised of blood vessels and a nervous plexus, a bunch of nerve cells. Underneath the submucosa is a layer called the muscularis externa, which is comprised of a nerve cell plexus, a nerve cell network, and muscle layers. In most of the intestine, most of the digestive tract, we have two layers. Circular muscle, like the muscle that wraps around an arteriole, and longitudinal muscle. In the stomach, we're going to see a third layer called the oblique. So we're going to have circular muscle, longitudinal muscle, and oblique muscle in the stomach. But in general, circular and longitudinal muscle. And this is going to, these muscles, what is their function? Peristalsis. Moving the food, it's not food anymore if we're in the intestine, but moving the product of food digestion through the small intestine, through peristalsis, squeezing of the intestines in organized fashion, neuronally controlled, in order to propel a bolus of digesting food through the small intestine, or through the stomach, or through the esophagus, if we're not in the intestine yet. Peristalsis, muscle action. And outside the muscularis externa is a layer of cells called the serosa. Okay, so I walked you through the layered structure of the gastrointestinal tract. Most of the cells of the gastrointestinal tract have an apical membrane that is highly folded to increase the surface area available for absorption of food. So this is the lumen, this is one side, and this is the other side of the tube. This is the apical membrane facing the lumen. Basolateral is out here somewhere. The apical membranes are folded with structures called microvilli. increasing surface area of the apical membrane. Now let's talk about saliva. Okay, we're going to get into the first steps of digestion. You have 3 salivary glands. Parotid, here around your ear. Sublingual, under your tongue. And submandibular, inside your mandible, inside your lower jaw. 3 salivary glands producing saliva, and you produce somewhere between 1 and 2 liters of saliva every day. Right? Liters. You know what a liter looks like. Somebody hold up a there. Sophie is holding. There we go. Here. This is 1.5 liters. This is about how much saliva you make in a day. So where does it all go? Well, you swallow it. The secretion of saliva is continuous. It is constitutive. It's happening all the time to moisten your throat. But it is stimulated by the parasympathetic nervous system during the cephalic phase of digestion. So we're going to talk about phases of digestion. You can imagine that the cephalic phase is referring to your head. It's the brain part of digestion. Your brain is going to tell your salivary glands, time to start making saliva because you're going to get a meal and you need to get ready for it. So saliva is stimulated by the parasympathetic nervous system, lubricates, that is to say adds water to it, adds mucus, initiates digestion of carbohydrate through amylase. Salivary amylase starts the digestion of carbohydrate, and the digestion of fat through lipase. We also have some immune function and some protective function. If you eat something highly acidic or something highly base, saliva tends to neutralize that. It's got buffers in it. But the most important functions are the first 3. It's got some antibodies in it. You know, animals lick their wounds because they're trying to clean them and because it's protective. It's a innate response of animals. That's what saliva is and what saliva does. Here is a cartoon drawing of a salivary gland. And I'm introducing this now because we are going to see this again and again during exocrine secretions. So saliva is an exocrine secretion, right? You're secreting saliva, water, and other things into saliva, and then swallowing it, where it will get digested and processed. The salivary glands are comprised of an acinus, or an acinar epithelium, and a duct. The duct connects the salivary gland to the mouth. You've got little holes on the inside of your mouth where the saliva coming from the salivary glands is delivered to your mouth. So we've got duct cells and we've got acinar cells. You don't have to worry about any of the other words on this slide. I want you to know duct cells and acinar cells. This is not going to be on any test. It's just interesting. You produce watery saliva from your parotid gland, and you produce mucousy saliva from your sublingual gland, half mucus and half saliva, spit. I mean, this is all saliva, but it's half watery and it's half mucousy. And the submandibular gland is about 80% watery and 20% mucousy. Just some interesting detail about saliva. So so we have finished part one. What I would like to do now is take a break and catch my breath. And you should work on the clickers that are in your handout for the next, and take a break yourself. And then we will start, we'll pick up in the mouth and move from the mouth into the esophagus, into the stomach in about 10 minutes.